looking at 1862 gives us a great window onto a broad series of kind of heart-rending changes in Indian country. Events in Dakota country have gotten a lot of focus for obvious reasons, from the large-scale loss of life from the momentous shifts in the Dakota demography. You know, the entire population was moved and shifted around and has never, ever recovered. But in Ojibwe country in 1862, there was a lot going on at the same time. The U.S. government wanted to take a heavy hand with many different tribes. They had a pretty successful strategy of divide and conquer. So in 1862, there were issues here, as there had been in many places. You know, the Ojibwe were being financially eviscerated. The non-native Indian agents were corrupt, refusing to give out funds that were due to be paid to native people, selling goods that were supposed to be distributed to Native Americans out the door of the agency for personal profit. Hole in the Day, who was an Ojibwe chief in central Minnesota, saw a window of opportunity. He had been in communication with Little Crow. He knew exactly what was happening in Dakota country. And on the same day that things erupted in southern Minnesota, Hole in the Day sent runners throughout Ojibwe country saying, take prisoners of the whites, march down to Crow Wing, let's lay siege to Fort Ripley, and let's go to war. So at Leech Lake, at Walker, the Indian agency was attacked and burned. The white missionaries were imprisoned. Same thing at Ottertail City, which is near Ottertail Lake, kind of near Detroit Lakes in northwestern Minnesota, and went marching down to Crow Wing to find that Hole in the Day had not actually attacked Fort Ripley, and that he was posturing, and he had kind of deceived some of the other Ojibwe leaders. Warriors from Mille Lacs came over to Fort Ripley, surrounded it, and faced out to protect it from would-be attackers. And this much you can tell from the archives. What nobody really could tell is why. Why would some Ojibwe people want to protect the fort? Why would some be willing to go to war? Why was Hole in the Day lying to people? It's laid out pretty well in the assassination of Hole in the Day, but Hole in the Day himself wanted attention brought to these issues. I think he might have been willing to pursue military conflict if necessary, but he was more interested in using the threat of military action to pressure the U.S. government. Commissioner Dole was in Minnesota. He was the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. That happened about as often as a papal visit. And so he wanted his eyeballs, and he got them. Commissioner Dole wanted to either kill or arrest Hole in the Day, and they came to this council at Crow Wing, and they were agreed to meet in private with just a few attendants, but here came Commissioner Dole and 100 U.S. soldiers, and Hole in the Day lined up with 100 loyal Ojibwe warriors, and as they're facing off, you know, Hole in the Day is being told to surrender immediately, and he gestures, and another 100 loyal Ojibwe warriors come behind the U.S. troops, surrounding them, outnumbering them 2-1, and he says, well, you know, I'm not looking for trouble here, but I can't stop my people from defending themselves. And so now Commissioner Dole's horribly embarrassed, and Hole in the Day gives a very angry response, and he says, are you the smartest man that our great father could send in a trying time like this? Because if you are the smartest man that our great father has got, then I pity our great father. And so he's just insulting and on top of everything else. And you would think he'd just get shot at any point. But unlike the Dakota, unlike many other tribal groups, the Ojibwe had a very large population that spanned across the U.S.-Canadian border. 125 First Nations, Ojibwe First Nations in Canada. And you got to remember, the Confederacy was being financially supported by the British. Canada was part of Great Britain. And so for the United States, for the Union Army, which has already had to pull 2 regiments off the front lines of the Civil War to deal with the Dakota stuff, the idea of dealing with the Ojibwe at the same time, chasing them into Canada, igniting a war with the British, it wasn't going to happen. So Commissioner Dole says, make it go away, I'm going back to Washington, which he does. And now the new the new commissioners who are appointed to deal with Hole in the Day sit down, and Hole in the Day says, boys, you take out your paper, these are your terms. And he starts dictating terms for a new treaty. And he got everything he asked for. Got the treaty money paid back immediately. Got the Indian agents fired. Got even personal compensation for the burning of his house. He got everything he wanted, returned to his people, largely a hero for all of his manipulations. If one person had been shot at the Crow Wing thing, if Hole in the Day had decided to press an attack on Fort Ripley, if any number of things had happened, you would have had a bloodbath in northern Minnesota, just like in southern Minnesota, maybe worse, because the Ojibwe could have stashed their families away from conflict zones in Canada and fielded what would be, for the first time in the history of the United States, a professional Native fighting force that didn't have to worry about their children starving or getting shot. And that was the downfall for Pontiac, for Tecumseh, for any other major Indian resistance, was food and family. And so it would have been a really fascinating, but I think really horrifying turn of events had conflict erupted there. And most of the Ojibwe people in Minnesota who had survived would be in Canada now if that had happened too.